and I believe that the title of my sort of session this afternoon is very much about what I've learnt about Oxfordshire. Many of you will know that I've been Chief Exec of the Community Foundation for the last 10 years, and in that time I've seen so much. I have been really privileged and humbled, I think, to see close hand so much great stuff that's actually going on around the county, and a willingness to take liberal ideas and create change. But when I reflected on what I was going to talk about, I think perhaps for me it's that actually, unless we're really dealing with problems ourselves, it's really difficult for us to get engaged and really be outraged to do something about it. And it reminded me of an opportunity that I had to talk to the Civic Society in Oxford a few years ago. And I don't know whether any of you will remember the news at the time, but it was a very silly idea that was looking at the A34 and all the traffic problems we have in the county. And there was a suggestion, it might have been fake news, that actually what we really needed was a cable car. And that would be the way to clear the streets of cars and buses. And I think it's quite amusing when we actually think back where we are now, and if we were to walk down Broad Street or the High Street, and if for it to be empty, just one or two people and bicycles. And I think that's really the point that we're all feeling at the moment, is change has happened without us even realizing it. We've actually all come behind a cause that affects us all. And it's having its impact. And so suddenly I think things that would have taken years to happen are now happening and within our grasp at this very moment. So what I wanted to talk about today was, I believe that actually the Community Foundation, or what we're going to be calling OCF, is actually the solution for change in the county. And why do I think that? I think in the next sort of 10-15 minutes, I'm going to cover off 5 things that I think actually will help us see that we have a role to play, and with enough people, we can really create some great change. So I'm going to talk about, for those of you who don't know what a community foundation is, where we've come from, what we've achieved, and why I believe that COVID-19 is giving us a reason to hope, and perhaps there is a silver lining. Also, it's actually key that whilst this is bio in Oxford, we talk about Oxfordshire. It's really key for me that Oxfordshire needs to be on the map and not just the city of Oxford. I think that's one thing that I've learned over the last 10 years. People are very passionate about where they live in the county, and it's not always all just about Oxford, although it's the global icon that we love it to be. Another thing for me is that many of the challenges that we face are global problems, but what makes them really exciting and perhaps gives us the ability to believe that we can change is that there are local solutions to many of these problems. And again, coming back to the silver lining of the current pandemic, I think we are seeing that actually we have a real opportunity to involve everyone in the community and make sure that everyone participates and benefits from what we do. Only this morning as well, I think there was a post in one of the papers that Jayne Woodley had been talking yesterday about now being the critical time for humanity. And perhaps that's really important to me, this idea of humanity, because if we look at the word philanthropy, philanthropy has always been a difficult word. Probably in the last 10 years, it's been a word that I've used on and off. People don't like it. They find it very exclusive. But that is really what it's about. But I guess there's a sense that there's a benevolence there, that it's people who have that are wanting to do good to those who have not. And that perhaps means that it's very unequal. So I hope you like the picture of a writing of a word in the sand. It's an Aristotle philosophical word, eudaimonia. And what it really means is this point at which we reach in life when we reach a point of happiness, actually, but it's more that we're happy because we're doing the right thing. And it's not the right thing for ourselves, but it's the right thing for everyone. And I think that is perhaps where most of us are questioning our lives. I was sitting in on some of the sort of talks yesterday, and I think this was coming across from many of the businesses who were very openly and honestly talking about the fact that maybe in the first couple of weeks of lockdown, it was all about them, and they were trying to think how they could save their business, what they needed to do. But actually, as we've moved through, everyone has really wanted to help each other. And I think there can't be anyone in the country who hasn't clapped or been aware of the clapping for the NHS, but also just been overwhelmed by the amount of community effort and the mobilization of volunteers that we've seen supporting neighbours and communities in a way that actually shows us what is possible, which brings me back to the silver lining. So I think that actually maybe we ought to not be thinking about philanthropy, but this sense of purpose, which is another word that was coming out yesterday around why are we doing what we're doing? And I think that's a key thing for all of us. So just to recap on what is a community foundation, why do we exist? It's a very exciting time for the Community Foundation in Oxfordshire this year, because in 2020 we're celebrating 25 years. But it wouldn't have been possible without one man. And I guess he's a role model for me. He's Fred Goff, an American who was both a banker and a lawyer. And the one thing that he found was that when people died, they wanted to leave money to charities, but often those charities were no longer needed, or there were more pressing problems. And perhaps what you needed to create was a foundation, a place where if you weren't a Rockefeller or a Carnegie, you could still leave some money, and local people could then establish what the needs were at that time in their communities and put it to good use. And I think that's very much the thread that the Community Foundation in Oxfordshire has been sort of focused on. But as the problems seem to get bigger, we need to start prioritising and working together and collaborating more. And often I talk about our common good. So it's finding a collective organisation that can actually bring together all the people in a community or in a place that actually want to do some great stuff and make sure that everyone benefits and is able to participate. And I think some of the examples that we've seen throughout this whole crisis absolutely demonstrate that actually when people on the ground get involved, things can happen quickly, things can happen in ways that people didn't even think possible. And I think that that's something really powerful for community foundations to really lead a charge on that. And it's something that we've been very keen to be doing here in Oxfordshire. There is a little picture there of a group of people, 15 community foundations from all over Europe that actually came to find out what we're doing here in Oxfordshire that's different, and why we're one of 46 community foundations across the UK that together are able to distribute more than £100 million in grants throughout the year. So I think that sort of helps give a perspective of our credentials, but it doesn't really say about what we're doing here in Oxfordshire specifically. So as I've said, this is all about Oxfordshire and not Oxford. Hopefully you'll all be on that map somewhere, although I understand there are people from other parts of the world and countries across Europe attending. So, but yes, it's a colourful map and one that we know well at the Community Foundation. So we've obviously talked about our grant making, that the Community Foundation is able to make grants. We can only do that because people entrust us with their funds. They give us discretion to try and address the problems that we see. And I think what you'll see there on the slide is maybe two sides to Oxfordshire, two very different doorsteps. And that is something that I believe that I've learned in the last 10 years is totally unacceptable, that this should exist and coexist, and we need to change. And I believe that at the moment, we have possibly the right ingredients to really lead that social change and make a huge difference. So how do we do that? I think the easiest way to sum it up is, I would say, that we actually join up the dots. We do a lot of insight, we do research, we work with lots of partners. And I think for me, that's the key to all of this. We cannot change unless we are working in a collaborative and cooperative way. And I think, you know, philanthropy is just one part of the solution, but actually we need to bring all parts of the community together. And I think what's great about Bio 2020 is it allows all constituent parts of the community to come together. So whilst there will be lots of businesses here, there will be others who have interests. And I think the wonderful thing that I found over the last 10 years about business in Oxfordshire is very much that it is shifting and there is a social purpose emerging. Many of you know I used to work at Barclays for a long part of my career, and I think what really impressed me most was that businesses felt a very paternal relationship with their employees. They felt responsible for them, and perhaps more than ever with the pandemic that's going on, businesses appear to have really stepped up in terms of the welfare of their staff, trying to understand what they can do, because those employees have a community in the business. They're part of the relationships. It helps them feel connected. And I think that that is a key thing, what we mean by joining up the dots, that in some way we are all connected. And perhaps what the virus has highlighted is that we're all at risk. And I guess it's our approach to risk and how we can deal with that together that will really enable us to create change. So for me, it's not really a revolution. It is actually just more an evolution over the last sort of 10 years and 25 years at the Community Foundation, that actually what we're trying to do now is to focus on much fewer of the social priorities that we see, but to actually provide more leadership and work in a much more collaborative way with others to try and make some of these things happen. And I guess I like the picture here because I think we'd all like to be a lot stronger and braver than we are. But actually, I believe that we can achieve that when we do it together. So for me, it's always been about collaboration and not competition. I think the other thing that we're realizing is that the way that we've been living in the world is no longer sustainable. And actually, what can we do in our local communities to actually change that? And it requires us all to be involved in some of this change. And I think the Sustainable Development Goals have always been a good marker for me. If we were to look at Oxfordshire, you know, where do we actually stand on all of these things? And sadly, I would say, you know, the number one thing there, no poverty, we are a very unequal county. And that, I think, is the one thing that we will probably see more of in the next 10 years. So we want to make sure that we're doing all we can and working with partners to try and address some of those challenges. This is just the permission of snow is something that I heard a while ago, which was that when there's a crisis, people come out and do what they need to do. And I think that, again, has been something that we have seen. The power of community has actually just grown overnight. And what do we do now to make sure that that power of community continues to grow, and that everyone in our community has an equal voice, that wealth is shared more equally, and that everyone's livelihoods and futures can be better. And I think that brings me back to what is a community foundation, that possibly it could be the glue. It's the magic that can actually just enable communities to flourish. There's a little camper van there, which might be an idea for many of the businesses online, that actually it's another organisation like a community foundation in Manchester that's actually taking its work out into the community. And I think that this is key. This idea of inclusive growth is vital. We've got to reach out to where people are that could be helped and involve them in the decision making. Something that we've been doing in Banbury when we've been working with our age-friendly Banbury partnership, which is all around older people and involving them in our decisions. And I think for me, it is very much around this idea of how do we unlock the power in our community? What can the Community Foundation offer that will not only join up the dots, but it can act as a facilitator of collective action. We can attract resources. Our current activities during the crisis have highlighted that we can raise funds, but it's not always just funds that are needed. It's about making connections, bringing all constituent partners across the community and the county together to actually think about what are the key things that we can change. We've seen that we've managed to change so much during the current crisis, and just imagine what we could achieve if we actually put all that together. And for the right reasons. And I believe that the Community Foundation is the organisation that can help us do that. We can't do it alone, and that's why we have a very tiny role to play, but I believe an important role that can actually just help bring all these organisations together and make great stuff happen. Because for me, that's what it's about. It's actually doing the right thing, which brings me back to eudaimonia. You know, it isn't just philanthropy that's needed. It's about how we feel as humans. And I'm sure many of you have had those thoughts in your head recently. What can we do to change? How can we somehow make the world slightly better? If I'm honest, my personal opinion is that, you know, the coronavirus is nature's way of saying enough is enough. You know, it's not sustainable. Some may say I'm too optimistic, that isn't ever going to be possible, but I believe we have to try. And it worries me that people were queuing for hours and hours to go into IKEA yesterday. But it doesn't have to be that way. I'm sure that we can, in Oxfordshire at least, we can set it up as a role model and put it on the map where things can be done differently and everyone benefits. So I think just to sort of, why do I think we can do this is because for the last 2 years or so, we have been working in Banbury to create an age-friendly Banbury partnership. And whilst it was sort of predicated on making Banbury a great place for older people to live, I believe these are 5 things that we would all want in our lives, that we want to live longer, we want to spend our lives in good health, we want to have useful and purposeful work, we need good housing, but more importantly, we need to feel connected and have the support of friends when we need them. And I think those are things that we can all sort of adhere to. And if that's perhaps our priorities, how do we ensure that together the only things that we try to endure and harness out of all of this is that we improve all of those things for everyone. So I guess I might just have a little pause and say that if we want to go fast, the best way to do it is not to go alone, but to go together. Which brings me back again to why I think that the Community Foundation is reaching out to all of you and wanting to find others that want to join this movement and say that actually now is the time, we can do this together. And there's lots of great stuff already happening. I'd love to talk to you more about it.